What's a red flag in a job interview that says walk away? When they try to offer you a salary that's lower than what they're offering. Like the job ad says $70,000, but they try to offer you $40,000. And they try to justify it by saying you're not experienced enough. Except you are experienced enough. You might even have more than enough experience. Story 2. Years ago, I had the worst job ever. I worked 80 hours a week for a narcissistic boss who delighted in pitting one employee against another. What I should have asked in the interview was, how did this position open up? I found out later that my predecessor had died at work. Story 3. When they ask if I have any questions for them, I ask, what do you like about working here? If they take too long to answer or can't name anything, it's pretty much guaranteed I won't like working there. Story 4. During one of my interviews, as I was talking to the hiring manager, I could tell he's a little sarcastic, power-tripping git. His assistant was sitting across from me, and he looked depressed, like he just wanted to quit on the spot. Sometimes the red flag is reading people's body language on how the boss enters the room. Story 5. Had an interview for a sales position the other day, and they said they only hire women because women are better at sales, am I right? I'm a woman, but I don't know. Comes off creepy as hell. Story 6. I was at a group test for a company, and the person flat out told us that we are not allowed to have personal cell phones at work. Okay, but then they proceeded to tell us that if someone called to get a hold of us by calling the company that they wouldn't pass on any messages. I raised my hand and said I had a question. I asked them if someone called to let me know a loved one was in a serious car crash if they would let me know. He looked at me and said no because I was there to work, nothing else. I stood up and started walking to the door. He asked me where I was going. I told him I'm leaving. He was like, we haven't started the test yet. I looked him in the eye and was told that nothing is more important than family. And if you won't tell me if a loved one was in a crash, then this is not a place for me. As I was walking out, there was a manager in the lobby. He asked me what was going on, and I told him. He got upset and asked me to please stay and he will fix this. I said no thanks. If someone from HR tells you the job is more important than family, I am done. So technically, I didn't even have an interview, even though they called me a couple times to come back and do the test. I told them I wasn't interested both times and never heard from them again. Story 7. I've been waiting for this. I was in a job interview that had so many red flags I almost got up and left. Firstly, I was asked to take an IQ test. I'm not even kidding. The test was so old, the text was typewriter font. The lady who handed me the test told me to not even worry about finishing in the time allotted. And it isn't really a big measurement that they use. This is a job in public accounting where usually your schooling and certifications speak for themselves. Second, I was able to count and time how long I was left alone in a conference room. 3 times, 20 minutes total. I did a first group interview with young associates, casual vibe. Then they all left to go get a group of partners to talk to me. I could literally hear them standing on the floor above, likely discussing if I was a good fit mid-interview. Like, just leave one person there and have the 2 other people leave, like, what is this? Third, and probably the most insane, I was offered the job with not much information, asked if I could accept it right then and there. Politely said I needed more information and could respond in 2 days. I knew I was going to decline, I just didn't want to do it to their faces as they were pretty pushy, even though the younger associates said there would not know if a week would be enough time for them to decide, as they had many other interviews to conduct. Anyways, I reiterated that I needed more formal information, like a formal offer letter, hello? Partner gives me his card, and I hear nothing from them for 2 days. I send an email stating I was staying true to my word that I have an answer despite never getting a formal offer. And the guy responds saying he wasn't aware I was waiting for that and could get something drafted up if it would change my opinion. BTW, yes. As they were being pushy and rude, I decided I was fed up and asked if I could see the scores of my IQ test. 3 partners all over the age of 65 laughed and said, oh, it's just a requirement that one of our old partners came up with. We don't even know what we got all those years ago. Also, BTW, this was for a busy season internship. There were so many other things that were red flags, like when I asked the associates what their busy season hours looked like. They responded in their yearly hours. Story 8, we're like a family. They badmouth one of their current employees to you. They say you have to buy anything from them or bring your own supplies, but you'll be reimbursed. They make you do any work for free. As part of the interview process, they get weird about any clarifying questions you have. The interviewer does not speak the same language as you. They make any comments about your age or appearance. Story, oh yeah, another one, don't underestimate gut feeling. I interviewed at a very well-known international company. The job was in my skill set, the location was good, the salary was very competitive. I got through the screening interview with flying colors. The next interview was with the woman who would be my direct manager, Delia. I get there and Delia asks a few cursory questions and then she starts asking me about the town I live in. Okay, slightly weird for an interview, but whatever. Well, the line of questioning goes on for about a half hour. Ended up Delia wanted to move there and wanted to know more about the town and the schools. Thought it was really weird to do that in an interview, so I repeatedly tried to steer things back to the, job interview. Nope. Finally, I gave up. I kind of drew things to a close and took my leave. The whole thing was just really strange, and something was very off about Delia. Anyway, Delia called and offered me the job 3 days later. I declined as I'd just not had a great feeling about it. I was currently employed at a job I liked, so I had no compelling reason to accept a job unless it was something really great. No sooner did I decline than Delia starts literally berating me for wasting her time. And now she has to start all over because I declined, and on and on. I finally just said something along the lines of, "I wish you well in your search," and hung up the phone, relieved, because I knew my gut was 100% correct. Sure enough, I was at a party about 2 months later. I ended up talking with a woman who had worked at that company but had since moved on. I said, "Really? I interviewed there about 2 months ago and ended up declining the offer because I just didn't have a great feeling about it." She asked who I interviewed with, and when I said Delia, I could see immediately from the look on her face that Delia was bad news. She was like, "Oh boy, did you dodge a bullet. She is crazy. Can't hold on to staff members for more than a few months. They only keep her because she's great at the job but a crap manager. Trust your gut." Story 10. I interviewed for a 6-figure job and they wanted me to commit to a 5-year contract while being paid 30% less than the average market rate. They said if I left before the end of the 5 years it was a $50,000 penalty, and I couldn't work at a competing business within 30 miles. I wanted to negotiate around what they were offering and at least write in guaranteed annual 6% raises to outpace inflation, but they wouldn't even budge on that. So you want me to make you millions of ducking dollars while you sit on your greedy ass, and in exchange gracefully pay me super crap base, guarantee no raises, and keep me hostage in your business? I still can't ducking believe the recruiters seemed to try and talk me out of walking away when I said no. Story 11. Disorganization. I once went for an interview scheduled the week prior. When I showed up, no one was expecting me. Finally, after several phone calls, the receptionist realized the managing director of the company had scheduled the interview but told no one. Yeah, great first impression. It got worse from there. I needed to take a language exam. It was for a translation company, but no copy of the exam could be found. Finally, after 20 minutes of searching, the receptionist found a copy of a copy that was barely readable, and she ended up having to retype it so I could take it. It was a pen and paper exam. So now we're 40 minutes in. I still am made to wait another 20 minutes to meet with the managing director. I go in, and as we're walking in, he tells his secretary that there should be no interruptions for the next 20-25 minutes. 5 minutes into our interview, a young woman, crying hysterically, barges into the office to talk to the managing director. From what I could gather, she'd made some kind of error and was freaking out about it. He kept me waiting another 20 minutes to deal with whatever it was, and then resumed the interview. His next question, "What is your greatest weakness?" What? I was already done at that point, so I decided to be cheeky. I looked at him, smiled coyly, and said, "I work too hard and am a total perfectionist." He goes, "Well, that's a textbook answer." And without skipping a beat, I replied to a textbook question. He said, "Touché." We talked a bit more, and then he offered me the job on the spot. Yeah, $1 million in compensation wouldn't be enough for me to work at that crap show. They had a million red flags. I actually did have another interview scheduled for that day, so I politely declined his offer and excused myself, saying that I didn't think it was the right fit for me, and I had another interview to get to. He was still trying to talk to me as I was walking out the door. Story 12. My favorite question to ask is, what is the biggest challenge my role can face, and what kind of support do I have to access it so I can navigate those challenges? If they respond with, "Oh, there are no challenges here, it's pretty easy," is a lie for one of two reasons. Either the interviewer knows what the problems are at the job and is lying to make the job look more attractive, or they are unaware of what the challenges are because HR or management is so toxic that none of the employees will actually come to them for help. Had a few jobs, once being a sales job that reposted the pain after 2 months answer that there are no problems, therefore there is no support because it's just that simple. I refused the offer. Had another one actually have to stop, think for a minute before they answered, and have me an example of a challenge and how they, the manager, would help in that case. Sure, it could be a made-up scenario, but half the answers I give them are completely made up too. For those tell us about a time you had a problem with a manager, customer, and how you dealt with it answers. Even a place like McDonald's has problems that an employee can face off the job. Story 13. My job was 2 separate interviews, a government background check, 2 days of orientation, and about 50 documents and tests in the company's internal system. Look at the cars of the employees in the parking lot. If you see a bunch of bombed out beaters GTFO because they ain't paying their employees crap. Look at the workers during the walkthrough. Do they look happy, complacent, or sad? A company will tell you what you want to hear, and it's all sunshine and roses. Research what the nationwide average is for the position you are applying for, Before negotiating a starting wage or salary, pay attention to medical benefits and other benefits offered. A lot of places will try to start you with like 3 days of vacation a year and act like they are doing you a favor. Try to research the company you are applying for. Is it well liked in the community? Does it have scandals? Good management can make or break a company. Treating the workers with respect is crucial and directly tied to the company's profit. Ask other employees if the place has a high turnover rate and if they often fill positions with temps. Just because you took a job doesn't mean you are obligated to stay because they offered you a job. It doesn't take long to realize if a job is a hellhole. I once applied to a pontoon building shop and realized that it was basically a sweatshop, walked the duck out and never looked back. Ended up with a much better, much higher paying job. Some people don't know how to discern a good job from a bad job because it's all they know or they have only had crap jobs in the past. Just because other people will eat crap doesn't mean you have too. Story 14. Depends on where you are and how much you are willing to tolerate and how desperate you are to switch. I'm in a senior role, working for 22 years now, and with no particular strong reason to switch jobs. My current employer has a very strong MNC culture, and we generally treat each other with a lot of courtesy and respect. Still, I ended up interviewing for a senior role at one of the big fours recently. Just curiosity, I guess. And the HR person was a friend of mine. Anyway, I turned up for a 30-minute Teams call. The interviewer turned up 10 minutes late, no apologies, didn't introduce himself, nor did he explain the role. Instead, he jumped straight away into what I believe he supposed was a grilling exercise. He wouldn't let me complete, kept interrupting me with his next question before I had finished answering the previous question. His whole demeanor was as if I was lying about my role and my experience. Kept referring to me as boss. At one PT, he said, "Boss, you're using a lot of big words. Can you explain in ordinary language?" Like, I was explaining a highly technical advisory project my team had done and was keeping it as simple as I could. I really felt like walking out, but tolerated him out of respect for my HR friend. After the call, I called my friend and said, "Thanks, but no thanks." So for me, a basic level of courtesy and respectful professionalism is an absolute must. If he was talking to me in that manner, I shudder to think how he treats juniors. Not for me, quite happy where I am. Story 15. One time I asked how much I'd be getting paid per hour, and the interviewer told me that they prefer applicants who don't want to only come to work for the money. So that, story 16. I arrived early for an interview, and the secretary screamed, "You're late," upon seeing me, when I was actually early. Guess the other person bailed. Just shows you how you'll be treated going forward. Story 17. They had me fill out my application again. They told me the interviewer was unable to be reached, but I was welcome to wait. The HR lady just left for lunch while I was sitting on the other side of her desk, where papers were piled to the ceiling. While she was gone, 2 other employees were talking about how a missing one was pulled out of the lake that morning. After an hour, I was led to another room where I waited another 10 minutes. The interviewer realized she was the wrong person and helpfully led me to the correct person, where I started my elevator spiel in a hallway, only to be cut off mid-sentence as the correct interviewer told the incorrect interviewer that the position had already been filled and she wouldn't hire a new grad anyways due to the union. I mentioned there was one other job I'd applied to, and we went and found that interviewer, who was excited to talk to me, but told me he couldn't hire a new grad for the position I'd applied to, but the union might allow him to hire me in a separate ward. He was opening up for detoxing addicts. I was so desperate for a job, but I was so grateful when I got back to my car to see a missed voicemail for a job offer at another place that wasn't so much of a hot mess express. I got the detox offer a week later, but turned that one down. Story 18. I had an interview start with a supervisor coming in hot, super cranky, saying he doesn't normal do interviews and didn't know what to ask, got annoyed and sent in a junior guy who really didn't know what to say. It was a complete waste of both our time and showed how disorganized the place was. It was a multinational bank and financial services company, but they lacked any formality or clarity in that introduction. Another place I interviewed immediately wanted me to take a test before I met the boss. Questions included some basic math, but others were strange, like every good dog has a select one option: bone, water dish, house, collar. It was so frigid and weird. Finally, I got to have a conversation with the boss, and I swear all he did for 45 minutes was talk endlessly about the job and what he didn't like. When the next boss walked in, he had nothing to say, to which I responded, "That's okay, I think the other guy spoke enough for both of us." He had a good laugh. I shook his hand and thanked him for his time and wished him luck on his continued search. I didn't even want to consider an offer from that loony bin. Story 19. I once answered a few questions at an interview as a record store manager, and their third question was, when can we schedule a lie detector test? Of course, not being an idiot and knowing that this is against state law, I jumped at the chance, just for the experience. By the time it was over, they thought I was the Unabomber. Story 20. The biggest one I ever personally ignored was I had a company try to get me for 6 months. I would hear from them every other month. Finally, I thought, well, they clearly like me. I learned the day I started that each time I turned them down, they would hire someone new and they would end up quitting within a couple of months. The last time around, they hired someone who left a month in and then hired a second person who ghosted after 2 weeks. So they hired me, making me the 5th person in this role in 6 months. Ended up being the worst place I ever worked. I stuck it out for a year and a half. Basically anything where what they tell you in the initial phoner is different than what they're saying to you at the end of the process. TBH, I've heard it all. Also, we need someone to wear a lot of hats. We are understaffed. We haven't decided what the role is yet. We aren't going to hire anyone. We expect to go into a hiring freeze, or forces are rapidly changing our needs, and we now feel that this role is probably going to be unnecessary. Work hard, play hard, expect extra hours, and very little fun. Story 21. I interviewed with a company for a really good job. I do accounting. I really thought I wanted the job. Paid very well, nice location, decent chance for moving upward. But first signal was that the boss was very dry and unpersonal. She asked me what I looked for in a company. I said that I really liked a place that people were friendly and got along and was a happy place because you do spend a ton of time at your job. She then proceeded to tell me in a long diatribe how work was not a place where people should come to socialize, and that your workplace is for work, not for friends, and that chit-chat and idle conversation was something she highly discouraged, stuff like that. I got the sense the place was wired way too tight. As I was done with the interview, I took more notice on my way out that the office, while very full, had zero noise going on, and nobody was at each other's cubes talking, and all of the cubicles I glanced in were very Spartan and bare of anything personal. I told the recruiter who got me the interview to politely tell them I wasn't interested. I don't want to sit silently for 8 hours a day. Story 22. We are a highly dynamic, fast-paced environment where we look for employees to take initiative. Basically, they're going to throw you into chaos without any help or proper training. We're family here. No. You leverage emotional blackmail to boost productivity and profits. Story 23. I was asked to review their company's latest brand video, highlighting their past year's success and all the great clients they worked with. Anything else you want to add? I was asked after presenting my notes. That's everything, I said. So nothing else then, the VP of the company asked. I felt pressed, so I called out a mistake in the video, which was on their site as well as published online and across CTV. There's still filler text, lorem ipsum, in 2 spots, I said. Their CMO stood up and swore at me, calling me a liar. I calmly asked them to play back the video and pointed it out. VP nods. CMO storms out. I got a job offer 3 days later. I declined it based on the temperature tantrum. Their HR director was dumbfounded at my reason. Story 24. The interviewer not understanding the question they asked you to answer. I had a future manager ask me if I could draw an example of 3-tier system architecture for them. I did. And she told me I was wrong and that it was only 2-tier. I did get the job. I took the 3rd day off when I released the job was also not what was advertised. I was told 50% of the job would be designing system architecture. It was not, it was project management. Simply put, my manager had no clue. My partner at the time convinced me to stay and not quit. What played out was 2 years of hell. For those that don't know, a tier in this case refers to a layer of computing processing in it. So code running on a server would be one tier, a database would be another, and code on a client browser in terms of JavaScript would be another. And when we refer to a simple 3-tier architecture for web, this is what we mean. Story 25. I had an interview earlier this year for a remote position in my niche specialty. Dazzled the preliminary HR and the Skippy account manager, which included a skills test, where I taught Skippy 2 separate things. Finally, Zoom met with the owner of the company after being blown off by her once. Poor Skippy was embarrassed, but not as badly as he was about to be, where she promptly commented on my age and directly asked if I had children. I tried to respectfully deflect back to the job and position. Owner asked if I was going to be able to uproot the 20 urchins and a loaf of a husband in 5 years when she decides to bring everyone in-house. I firmly stated that I would not consider relocating at this time. You could see her ears and throat turn beet red, and she immediately went on a rant about how she didn't get to where she was by letting men walk over her, and how dare I give another man that power. Lady, I wasn't taking the job because you wanted me to relocate when you advertised a remote position. My choice, not a man's. Story 26. I went in for a job interview at a place my grandfather had worked and subsequently retired from. When he was there, I knew the environment was great and management was also great. I applied for pretty much the same position he had, just in a different building and scaled down a bit. I interviewed and promptly got offered a maintenance job. Paid less, longer hours, but a 4-day work week, and the crap was 2 p.m. to midnight. I told the lady that wasn't what I was interviewing for at all. I was here for X position. She refused. I asked her why she was interviewing me for that position only to offer me something entirely different. She didn't have a response. I walked out. On my way out, I ran into a few guys my grandfather had worked with. They remembered me and told me to run. The new management apparently was driving the place into the ground, and they couldn't keep people. I since have gotten into the carpentry union and am much happier, despite 2 layoffs, because the industry isn't doing too hot at the moment. Story 27. Too many interviews. When they don't know how their hiring process works, I've got told after a telephone interview that I could come in for a day and get an offer after that. They wanted another interview after I spent 8 hours with them total already. Do they reimburse your travel expense? When the company benefits get worse every time you talk to someone. At a job fair, they told me 4 to 5 days home office is normal. At the first interview, they said I have to come in twice a week, but they have offices nearby I can use. At the end of the second interview, I had to travel a couple of days every 6 months or so to a city far away. Same company that wanted a third interview after promising an offer after the second one. When they promise you a big raise within a year if you're good at the job, yeah, they'll bury you with work and claim you're just not good enough. Story 28. If you are serious about a job offer, the offer itself should be accompanied by the specific details of not just the pay, but the benefits as well. Health insurances and retirement plans are 25% or more of total compensation. I should not have to find out on my first day of work that you only offer exchange plans and do not offer premium support. Acting crazy when I ask for details on all the types of compensation is a major red flag. Competitive is just not an acceptable answer. When you make an offer on a house, does your tender letter say you are willing to make a competitive amount without an actual number? In any other situation, you would be seen as an unserious tire kicker. Candidates deserve the same level of care and respect regarding the full financial impacts of what you are offering. Story 29. I once applied for a job that offered X amount. Went in for the interview and it wasn't an interview. Manager of the team I would have been working for spent the whole time selling me on the company. Never once asked about me or my capabilities. Talked about how there's money to be made for those who want to work for it, blah, blah, blah. Immediately, I knew this was going to be an overworked environment. I didn't tell them that because I was desperate to get out of where I was at. But I was also happy where I was at. But it was a temporary position, and I wanted a job before it ended. Made my decision before I even got home that I was not going to accept it if I got offered. 2 days later, job offer comes in for $20,000 lower than the minimum on the offer. Immediate reply back, not interested, and they couldn't understand why. I should have been blunt, but the industry I'm in is small, so you never burn bridges. Story 30. Infighting during the interview. I attended an online interview at a school where I was interested in teaching, and I was actually really excited about the job. It was a new magnet school for the district, and I'd get to make my own decisions about curriculum. The hiring committee was 3 employees. The first 2 were lovely. The third was 5 minutes late to our Zoom meeting, and in the middle of the meeting, she stopped the conversation and said, "Why are we doing this interview? Didn't we already decide about this position?" The other 2 looked absolutely mortified. One of them responded, "I don't think that's appropriate to discuss right now." I tried to laugh it off and started my next answer with, "Well, if I do really get the chance to teach here." I also thanked them in my after-interview email for seriously considering me. But when principal called, thrilled to offer me the position, it was an immediate hard no. I just couldn't shake the taste that comment left in my mouth. Story 31. A lot of questions about handling interpersonal drama. Like one or two, fine. Primary focus of interview, there's some crap going on there that is just not worth the stress. Story 32. First job interview. I ever had the manager showed up 10 minutes late. I was 15 minutes early and didn't have papers together. I wasn't even interviewed. It was straight to signing papers to be hired. Other employees interrupted the interview several times. There was an instance where an employee made a racially motivated joke to a coworker in front of customers, and the manager's response was, "Don't scare him away. I need this position filled." Had to ask me my name twice, and never referenced my name to any other employee. Safe to say I did not follow up with training like I was supposed to, and I'm not ashamed of it. Edit. Forgot to mention the position I was hired for was not the one I applied for. The pay was significantly lower, and when I mentioned it, I was told that the application is just a general app and they fill what they need. That's not what was advertised, LMAO. Story 33. One of my potential employers told me I had to shave my beard as it was unprofessional. I asked, "Do I look unprofessional in a full suit, tie, etc.?" No you don't. It's just a company culture." Bullet dodged. Story 34. Based on the worst place I have ever worked. During the interview, you are seated at the end of a large table with a bunch of people seated around it, each one peppering you with questions, machine gun style. with them talking over each other. It felt like an interrogation more than an interview. It turns out that it was a family business, with the father giving each of his kids a department to manage, and they all guarded their kingdom ferociously. Something as simple as ordering a computer took forever. The computer had to be ordered through the computer department. Any upgrades like video cards or memory had to come through the service department since they were parts. And any software, including a copy of Windows, had to come through the stationery department manager, who only puts in an order once a month no matter what. Story 35. They get your name wrong. They get your interview time wrong that they scheduled. They don't show up on time for your new interview time. They ask during the interview, which position are you applying for again? They make it obvious they are distracted doing something else on screen. And finally, all email communication is unprofessional with spelling errors and S. Happened to me. I turned down the second interview I was offered, and the response I got was that the team was disappointed in my decision. In 2018, I interviewed at a maxillofacial surgery center for an office assistant position. The job ad listed $15 per hour as the salary. During the job interview, they explained to me that I would start as a probationary employee with a salary of $13 per hour. And after 90 days, if all of the practice's partners agreed, I would be made permanent and a raise to $15 per hour. I told them that the job ad listed $15 per hour and made no mention of a probationary period, and that they should be honest in their job ads so they don't waste candidates' time and their own time. Then I walked out. I just saw a job ad a few weeks ago for the same position, same practice. Makes me wonder if they ever actually found anyone during all this time, or if they have learned anything. Probably not. Story 37. I once showed up to an interview, and they seemed surprised I was there, despite being my scheduled time to interview. It then took them an hour to track down the person who was supposed to interview me, and the secretary kept apologizing about how bad the office smelled because something crawled into the ceiling and died, and they haven't got it removed yet. So yeah, there were some red flags for that place. Story 38. Immediately run away from any job that asks you pay out of pocket for anything like a sales training program, their own proprietary certification, goods to sell, etc. That is 100% a pyramid scheme, MLM, etc., and not a real job. Once when I was really young and kind of just applying for whatever I could get, I went for an interview where the guy was basically telling me I would first have to pay for their sales training program before he explained the commission structure and how I could recruit people to sell under me, and literally drew it out as a pyramid on a piece of paper. Even at 20-nothing years old, I knew what that meant, and I just laughed in his face and walked away. Story 39. This happened back in 1986. I had a job interview in the Orlando area, and this interviewer told me that it was dangerous for me as a woman to drive down I-4. He wouldn't allow his 14-year-old daughter to do so. At the time, I was 24 years old and was in disbelief that this guy said this to me. I wasn't 14 years old, but 24 years old. I doubt he would have said this to a man, and if he did, the guy would probably get up, walk out, and not return, or thinks he was weird or something. I didn't get the job. Felt like walking away at that point, but didn't, as this would be seen as rude. Story 40. Worst interview I ever had was for a management position, and they were very vague about the nature of the company. I show up and I'm told my interview would be with one of the managers, and he'd show me the job en route. Confused, we exit the building, and he shows me the products he sells door to door to people working in business, basically bugging people at work to try to sell them perfume or other crap, saying he buys the stuff cheap from the company and the profit you can get is only capped by how high a price you can convince people to pay. I said no thanks and left. Story 41. We're looking for someone who can hit the ground running and handle multiple challenges and explosive growth. In short, they're trying to do everything on the cheap, and it's already failing. Hybrid with possible full remote work option. In short, they want you in the office full-time and will promise you WH as a carrot they'll never deliver on. We've screened a lot of candidates, so if you make it out to the next round, here's what we'll expect. Nope. Hard no. Nothing you do is going to satisfy these people. We'd love to see your Git. If and when you build something remotely valuable, they will claim IP because there's no way you didn't use their resources to build it. According to them. Story 42. Yes, we offer remote work, but with crazy conditions to unravel, e.g. everyone is expected to sit in a video call all day. Muted, but camera on. And the person interviewing you goes, in the office, my colleagues can see me through the glass walls. To me, this feels no different. Story 43. If they start talking about religion in your interview, I applied for a job at a chicken salad chain, and they said God is always watching you, but especially in our restaurant. Story 44. How do you feel about working in a small work environment? That means they're trying to operate with the least amount of employees as possible. Unless the pay is over $20 per hour, since it's likely a hotel or motel, and I believe that's minimum wage for that field in Los Angeles County, Just don't unless you're ready to fight for your time off. Story 45. I once interviewed for office assistant, where the interview seemed to center around my willingness and ability to make outbound sales calls. I withdrew my interest and ended the interview after clarifying. They were talking about the opening I had applied to, which said nothing about sales and listing. Story 46. When the job turns out to be something else compared to what was mentioned in the job ad. I once went to an interview about a job that would end up with a degree in carpentry after working there, under the supervision of a senior worker for a set time. What they actually offered was the job of monitoring a production line that made kitchen worktops from recycled plastic. I walked away. Some years later, the company was in the headlines for having committed a massive environmental crime, releasing microplastic and all sorts of chemicals in the nature. Story 47. This one's for younger people. If you have to pay money out of pocket for it, it's probably not a job. If you have to pay for training or to cover the initial cost of something or other, it might be normal to pay for a uniform or something, but even that should be able to be deducted from your first paycheck or whatever. Story 48. We're a family here, expect to be guilt-tripped, threatened, and having to work way outside the scope of what you were originally hired for. We believe in giving 100% of the time. You better appear to be working even if there's nothing to do. If it's a non-emergency service, and you're expected to be able to be on call at all time. Flexible schedule means your schedule, not theirs. They refuse to discuss wages or benefits and act offended when you bring them up. Story 49. I interviewed for a job as general manager of a cable TV company. The politically connected minority owner had been filling in as GM. In the interview, she made it clear that there were 2 people on the staff who she had hired, and you won't have to worry about them at all, which I interpreted as, these are my flying monkeys, and if you do anything to them, you'll be fired. No thanks. Funny thing is, I went to work for the same company 2 years later in a different city, and they were the best I ever worked for. Story 50. Had an interview scheduled for a specific time. I showed up 10 minutes early, and they had a line of 7 people waiting for a single interviewer. One guy walked out and didn't seem very happy about his interview. I walked right back out the door. The main thing was I knew my time wasn't going to be respected. The disappointed man was just the icing on the cake. I also had an interview where the receptionist had no idea that an interview was scheduled. Should have tipped me off that the staff were disorganized and there was a communication problem. Story 51. It's a huge red flag if the majority of available positions are unoccupied and a new department hasn't been created or there hasn't been a major issue that necessitated a mass firing. For example, I'm a teacher, and 2 years ago, 12 of the 15 teachers in my department left our school. At the beginning of the next year, a few of the new teachers commented on the fact that our department was mostly new to the school, and I told them that they'd quickly find out why. Our principal was a ducking nightmare. Story 52. I got referred to a job by a friend, and in the interview, they asked me what she's told me about the job. After I said a bunch of positive things, they re-asked, what negative things has she said? Then they proceeded to ask me how many kids I had and how I dealt with difficult personality, basically wanting me to rat on what my friend told me in confidence. My friend has said her manager was pretty toxic, so I wasn't surprised, but it's still the most unprofessional interview I've had. Story 53. When someone really emphasizes, we are all family here, and we often do after-hour things together. I had an interview where the HR person was casually saying how they hang out 2-3 times a week, and I responded, that's nice you offer that. The conversation went towards how I don't think I can do 3 days a week, as at the time I had dogs and they need to be walked. The conversation devolved into, those who don't participate in after-work activities probably won't do well here. Story 54. When the interview is conducted by 4 separate hostile managers who dryly fire questions at you before you can finish answering the last question. I'd gladly answer your question once I'm finished answering her question if I still thought I'd be interested in a position here. However, based largely on this interview process, I don't believe that's still the case. I can see myself out, thanks. True story. Story 55. Once showed up for an online job interview for a remote hybrid position. The interview was little more than a PowerPoint presentation on all of the so-called perks of working for the company, but nothing at all about the kind of work we would be doing, what the annual salary and healthcare benefits would be like, or even if we would be doing WF. Also, a remote hybrid was apparently code for door-to-door sales. Needless to say, I didn't request a time slot for an actual interview. Story 56. Basically, anything that bothers you or is unprofessional to your eyes is a bad sign. But the reality is that a crafty company to some people might not be crafty for you at your level. It might be okay for you to work there and outgrow it. Story 57. Went to a job interview where they 1. Lost my resume and application. 2. Complained that no one wants to work nowadays while shuffling G through application while I'm sitting in the job interview. 3. Hired me on the spot. 4. Rescheduled my first day 3 times. And 5. Sent me home on my actual first day because they didn't do any of my paperwork and told me to come back tomorrow. I did not come back tomorrow. Story 58. One place came in $5,000 less than my ask. I got that fixed. Then, the title on the offer letter didn't match what I interviewed for. I was supposed to be a lead with 4 direct reports. Hiring manager tells me he didn't want me coming in as the team's manager from day one, even though he was hiring for a lead manager. He told me he would change the title and team structure once the team trusts me. I walked away. Story 59. If they do the office tour and a bunch of employees have only been working there less than a year, this very often means they treat employees like crap or the job sucks. Story 60. I once had an interview that was a half-mile walk from my house. Great pay, great benefits, and I was killing it in the interview. Then one of them asked, "How well do you deal with conflict?" And his colleague piped up with, "People have major disagreements here pretty regularly, and it can get very emotionally charged." I was speechless, left the moment I could, and tried hard not to literally run out of the building. Story 61. If they ask what your reliable transportation is, most states that's illegal, because unless the job says you must have a car, you do not need to know how you get to work. Always means they'll skirt the law. Big sign, they're anti-union too. Story 62. They demand you tell them your current last salary before even telling you the hiring range, and then use that to hardline negotiate paying under market. They give you an IQ test before your interview, and then give the same IQ test at the interview to see if you would lie about it or cheat. They substances test you at the interview. I had one interview that did all 3 of these. Easiest no ever. Story 63. The male interviewers not letting the female interviewer, who's literally on the same side of the table as them, get a word in. I noped out of that one real quick. Story 64. Haven't even glanced at your resume. Stupid questions. They somehow try to make it seem as though having 2 jobs at once isn't possible, or oddly question you about what you're planning on telling your other job. Refuse to hire you because you have goals and aren't interested in working for the company for the rest of your life, or think living a city or 2 away is a problem. Pettiness is a big problem. Story 65. I worked sales, and twice I interviewed where they said they had to lay off their entire sales staff. I turned down the second interview both times. I've worked small companies that has a small sales team of 3 or 4 who quit around the same time. When your work buddy finds a better job, it inspires other team members to do the same. Story 66. Trying to pass of hybrid or mandatory in office, with a few days at home, once in a while as remote. Weird personality testing ahead of an interview. As someone in tech and tech adjacent, not using version control. Oh, there are absolutely some companies that don't. They have a buy mentality for literally everything, rather than at least building what makes them competitive. The Joel test score. Story 67. We started to interviews for a cook position. Business manager sent us a packet of his preferred questions. Among them was, ask about what a person they've worked with would say about them. After they answer, ask them to call the person and slide their phone over to you. We were all floored. If the interviewer had done that when I applied here, I wouldn't work here. Story 68. We have many candidates who want this job. Psychological pressure that implies you are replaceable. Be grateful that you are being considered. This is a toxic power dynamic. Story 69. When the interviewer can't help but kiss his own ass, that's caustic, narcissistic behavior on display. When they don't want to talk salary or hone in too much on mine. When it's a panel interview and the goal of everyone is to trip you up, instead of asking genuine questions. Story 70. I learned very recently about the coffee mug test, so that crap right there would have me walk out. You offered me a drink, it's not my responsibility. During or immediately after the interview at the place I'm unfamiliar with. To do anything with the cup once it's empty, unless it's a disposable vessel that can be thrown away or taken with me. Story 71. When they say there will be consequences for talking about wages with coworkers, such as, you won't be fired, but you will have no hours because I don't want you to collect unemployment. Then proceed to talk about how long they've been in business and have lawyers in their back pocket, so don't even think about trying to take them to court over it. Story 72. What position are you interviewing for? This was for a long-term acute care hospital. Then after I answered, they were like, for the Sokol Hospital? I applied to one in Northern California. I was like, nope, if they can't even get my basic application right, the red flags came up immediately. Story 73. Them asking you for money. Any job that requires you to pay them any kind of fee or reimbursement for supplies is a scam. Don't walk away, run away. Story 74. We're more of a family here. From 12 years of hospitality usually means they are immediately ready to duck you over, guilt trip you into never being sick or seeing family, and think they are the best possible employer because they bought pizza and gave you a free beer after you worked a 74-hour week. Story 75. I had this interview where she made me have a conversation in Spanish with another employee to make sure I knew how to speak for real. Then she told me I'm expected to stay after my shift unpaid. It's just the culture here. Shook hands and ignored their calls for weeks. I'm not working a minute for free. Story 76. I just had this in a tech interview. Key things that concerned me were references to fast-paced work environment, wearing many hats, pivoting priorities daily, and references to pushing really hard now for the benefit of later. Sounded messy. Story 77. This is an independent contractor position. Unless I'm calling the shots and making enough to carry insurance, bonding, I usually walk on these. Don't get me wrong, if it's paying $60 an hour and up, we can talk about 1099 gigs for sure, but most only want to pay you without helping pay your tax burden. Story 78. When you are asked if you are ready to work on the weekends, to work at 11 p.m., and if you need to drop everything and work for the benefit of the company. I'm sorry, but my life comes first. The company won't give me extra years of life and time with my loved ones. Story 79. A twist to the we're a family. BS, this is more than a job. We're trying to build something great together. Granted, this wasn't an interview thing. It was I haven't paid my employees a few months worth of work, but I'm asking them to keep working for free because they'll eventually get paid. Story 80. Around here, we work hard and we play hard. Nope, walk away, or you will be putting in 100 hours a week and getting paid for 15. Another one I remember. The moment the interviewer gets comfortable and swears or talks down about an employee, coincidentally happens to be the time the interview should end. Story 81. Sales manager said that during our next interview, he wants to see my customer list and how much business L will bring. L got up, said no thanks, and left the interview, never to return. Story 82. We're one big family here. They expect you to put up with a toxic environment and do uncompensated work. You can just, whatever. Boss has expectations they can't articulate well enough to train you properly. You just need to purchase the starter kit. It's a scam, not a job. Story 83. All right, one last thing. What if I told you that you could be your own boss and work from home on your own terms? All you have to do is commit to our upline. And story 84. I went to an interview a few days ago. They flat out told me, if you talk about your salary with other people here and you're caught, you'll be fired. Never went back. Story 85. When there's not an interview. My first ever job, I got hired without a formal interview. Just a text from the boss saying when I was going to start. I was 14, ended up working alone in a pretty popular boba shop in my town. It was terrible. Story 86. And then when the person tells you the company is like a one big family, learned that it means one big dysfunctional family that doesn't like each other. But yet some of the higher-ups have favorites. So I learned this the hard way. It was my first job, never going back there. Story 87. Any mention of looking for superstars or rock stars, any mention of we're like one big family here, any mention of chaotic environments, all pretty much guarantees you'll be working in a place that is short-staffed, poorly managed, and eager to exploit you as much as they possibly can. Story 88. When the people running the business are skinny 24-year-old dudes, they have a PS5 in the break room, and they talk about how work should be fun. You don't want to be at a failing startup with emotionally immature dude bros. Story 89. When you start interviewing them about the position, and they get hesitant and defensive. Sometimes even state, those are inappropriate questions, and the interview is for you, not them. Yeah, no, sorry, it's a two-way street here. If you clam up and get defensive, I stand up and leave. Story 90. If they list sales as one of the duties of the job, no matter how many other things they list or how minor they claim the sales responsibilities will be, the job is in sales. That will be your main duty, guaranteed. Story 91. The manager shows you other people's resumes and makes fun of them. He then proceeds to refer to several of his existing employees as ducking idiots multiple times. I've been unemployed for a year and a half and desperately needed the job, but duck that. Story 92. The way you learned about the job was you received a random text message that said, I'm a recruiter and we believe you're a great candidate for a job where you work from home 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, and make $500,000 a year. Story 93. I was in an interview and I asked the head guy how he liked working there. It was him and the manager. He looked at me and said, she's mean. She yells a lot. Dodge that. Every 2 weeks, the job was reposted. Nobody lasted very long. Story 94. They don't know why they use their specific position title. Can't answer questions like, this sounds like a vet tech position. Why did you post it as research tech? Or, this sounds like a research tech position. Why are you calling it animal tech? Story 95. I had a company tell me they pride themselves on working 55 to 60 hours in a normal week as a salary employee with no overtime. I laughed and they got offended. Story 96. 1. When they are late to their interview. It shows they can't appropriately plan or are dealing with so many internal crises that you got shoved down the priority list. 2. When they offer a salary lower than what was advertised. Story 97. Family here, good fit, cultural fit. Yes, I get it, but I'm going to assume high turnover because toxic. Loved you, but now we want you to interview with this other director, then this director, and then group interview, then too many steps, story 98. I asked during an interview what career progression options they had within their organization. They said the role you'd be in and the roles they were in are pretty much it. Nod my way out from there. Story 99. When they twist your words to mean something that they didn't. And then they call you 3 months later and say you were their second choice after the first one didn't work out. I basically laughed in their face. Story 100. Large salary ranges. For example, $60,000 to $110,000. They want to attract individuals who perform at the higher ranges, but they only ever give serious consideration to individuals who sit at the lower range. They're not a serious company. What was the worst job interview you've had? Story 1. I had an interview where I knew the answers I gave were good, solid examples. I understood the technical side well, but the interviewer kept sneering, being rude, and saying "really" in a skeptical tone. And I got the distinct impression he hated me. About 20 minutes in, I thought about politely calling it a day and leaving, but in my innocence, thought it would be good practice to stay. 40 minutes in, it's like a light switch goes off inside, and he's the nicest guy. His eyes light up, and he started hard selling the role and position to me. Introduces me to the team. The director interviews me, and he and the team are lovely. Apparently, their interview technique is to be rude to see how you perform under pressure, and they'd all been observing using a camera, and were impressed. I remained so polite and calm throughout, they couldn't understand why I declined. Edit. To save me responding to comments. I understand pressure testing is a legitimate technique, and whilst I felt deeply uncomfortable and my gut was screaming at me to get out of there, like in a nightclub when, the creepy guy is really bad news and you need to get out, I understood that it was a possibility that that is what he could have been doing. However, to add more context, they had my work history, including 10 years in the ambulance services, which involves resuscitation, whilst the public yell at you and threaten you. I'm used to being polite and professional whilst being harassed and threatened. Nothing spreadsheet-based, even pulling all-nighters, is going to match that for pressure. And I'm well known for staying calm and composed all the time, even if I'm exploding inside. My biggest objection was not realizing I was being broadcast and hearing them discuss my reactions to my face, like I was some kind of movie actor. It felt so violating. Story 2. At an interview to be a county street sweeper, guy asks me if I have a girlfriend. Proceeds to rant for 5 minutes how young people don't get married anymore. Then he asks me what I want to avoid at the job. At the time, I had no idea how to answer, as I'd never been asked that in an interview before. So I ask him to clarify, to which he just repeats the question over and over until he gets super angry that I don't know how to answer that. Then asks me to leave. To this day, biggest WTF interview I've had. Story 3. Showed up looking good in my suit with a ton of knowledge on Capital Partners. It turned out I had researched the wrong company named Capital Partners. Story 4. Interviewer. Putting candy bars on the table to open the interview. Have a candy bar. Do you want Hershey's or Snickers? Me. Neither, thanks. I. Go ahead. Pick one. M. I don't want any candy now. Thanks. You want to take one? Hershey's or Snickers? Okay, I'll take the Snickers. No, I want the Snickers. You take the Hershey's. No, thank you. Story 5. I was interviewing for a job in Houston and lived in Austin, about 2.5 hours away. I drove to Houston for the first round of interviews, and they said it went well and wanted to bring me in for a final interview, so I drove there again. It seemed like it went well, and they told me they had one more interview to conduct and would have a decision tomorrow. So the next day came and went. I emailed the manager to ask if any decision had been made. Nothing. Waited a couple more days. Left a voicemail. Nothing. Then a couple days later, I just called the main number for the company and told the receptionist why I was calling. She was like, well, someone just started in that job yesterday. They ghosted me after I drove a total of 10 hours to interview twice. Still salty about that 11 years later. Story 6. Had an interview, went well. I was offering the job on the spot and accepted. The HR manager went to get the needed paperwork, came back 10 minutes later and said, I must have forgot that we already filled this position. I'm sorry, but we don't have an opening. I could call you if something opens back up. I said, no, thank you. Story 7. Video chat interview. Red flag number 1. The interview was with 10 interviewers. I was told it would be one-on-one. Red flag number 2. Towards the end, they asked if I had any questions. When I asked, do you all enjoy working here? They all looked at each other nervously for about 20 seconds until someone said, sure, as much as you can enjoy work, I guess. Nope. Story 8. My personal favorite bad interview. I had been unemployed for a bit, was desperate for a new gig. Had gained a lot of weight living off of fast food, so my good pants didn't fit me very well. I sat down in the interview chair as the person was walking around to their side of the desk, and the button of my pants popped off. Did a one-hopper off of the desk and right into their coffee cup. Swished. No clink at all. For the interview, they were sipping their coffee, and I was sitting there with my pants unbuttoned, waiting for the big reveal. I left before they got to the bottom of their coffee, but they had to have put two and two together. This narrowly beats out the time I was offered water from a carafe at an interview, dropped it, and soaked both interviewers. At least that one wasn't as psychologically tense. No, I didn't get the job. Yes, I should have told them, but I froze up, and they were a very talkative interviewer. Story 9. Yeah, I have one that sticks out. I applied to a government branch as a network admin. The newspaper ad asked for a bachelor's degree. They called me into the interview. When I got there, the first thing the interviewer said was, "We wanted someone with a master's degree. Why did you apply?" Now, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had other interviews that day and got them mixed up. Crap happened. I just informed the interviewer that the ad I applied for requested a bachelor's degree and confirmed the position I was interviewing for. No, we definitely wanted someone with a master's degree. So again, why did you apply? If you wanted someone with a master's degree, why did you bother calling me in for an interview? You're very rude and unprofessional. Yeah, you ducked up at every junction thus far, but I'm the one who's rude and unprofessional. Story 10. I went in to apply for an administrative assistant position, and the guy kept asking me questions about liking kids and are my passports up to date, etc. I was so confused. Turns out what he really wanted was a nanny for his 2 young kids to travel with him and his wife back to India. I was so pissed he wasted my time. I noped right the duck out of there. Story 11. Started as the worst and ended as the best. The beginning started like this. I'm so sorry to have to inform you of this, but we pulled the wrong resume contact information. We didn't mean to call you in for an interview. Before leaving, the interviewer gave me a brief tour of the company grounds. Because they felt so bad for wasting my time, they introduced me to the department head that I would have been working for, if that department was actually hiring. Had a great conversation, and the department head was convinced that I would be an asset to them, and they hired me on the spot. Edit. Just wanted to add, since this got way more attention than I thought, that I have been with this company for over 8 years now, and they are an awesome bunch of people. It was a very unlucky, lucky day for me. Story 12. I applied for an internship at a human rights law office. They gave me questions on the spot to debate with them, like, should people accused of abuse remain anonymous until convicted? And is bribery acceptable if it's for a good cause? It was me versus a panel of 5 senior human rights lawyers for a whole hour, who just ripped me apart from start to finish. Everything I said, they made sound like the dumbest response with their rebuttals. By the end, I was a nervous, babbling wreck. Did not get the internship, but did appreciate the experience in retrospect. When they got back to me, they told me, your CV resume was fantastic. So we were quite disappointed with how poor your interview was. Burn Story 13. 5 interview rounds, with the last interview round being with the CEO, all for an entry-level customer service job. During the last interview, the CEO said, you weren't allowed to get sick, and you weren't allowed to leave at the end of the day until all of the work had been done. So even though the job was 8-4, the CEO said, customer service reps often stayed until 6 p.m. or later. She also asked if I would be comfortable secretly reporting to her about what the customer service team is up to. I declined the job offer, and the company harassed me with emails asking why and what they did wrong. Really glad I didn't take the job. Story 14. I went into a family-owned custom furniture shop that had several openings in the carpentry department. Red flag number 1 when I arrived. I spoke to the person at the front of house stating I was there for an interview. The conversation went as follows. Note, owner's office was directly behind the front desk. He was watching us through a 2-way mirror, me to front desk clerk. Hi, I'm here to interview for the carpenter position. I saw your post online. Owner storms out of his office, points a finger at me, face full of anger. Red flag number 2. Owner, are you experienced? Me. Yes, I have 7 years experience with carpentry, but I'm new to furniture. Owner. Are you experienced? Red flag number 3. Me. Yes. Owner. Fine. I'll get the lead carpenter and he'll talk to you. At this point, I should have noped the duck out of there, but I had been unemployed for some time and my savings was running on fumes. So I assumed he may have just been in a bad mood that day. So I had waited for the lead carpenter. Lead carpenter comes out and we have the interview on the sales floor. Interview goes as normal until he asks me about my experience. Carpenter. So tell me how you have experience with woodwork, but not with furniture. I build musical instruments. I'm familiar with all power tools and measurements required. Carpenter looks at me like I have 2 heads while I explain this, but the rest of the interview proceeds as normal. He stated he'd start me off at 10-hour probational hire for 2 weeks to see how I fit. Part of the interview comes where he asked if I have any questions. Me. So is the owner having a bad day? Carpenter. No, that's how he is. Red flag number 4. We have an awkward silence staring at each other for about 10 seconds, then without saying anything, I just walk out. Found out a few weeks later from a friend who was a woodworker that that place is known amongst furniture woodworkers as the place you want to avoid. And he mentioned that a few days before I interviewed, that their entire carpentry staff, minus the lead carpenter, about 8 people, walked out. I now live about a mile from that store and pass it on my daily commute. Every 5 to 6 months, they put up a "now hiring all positions" sign up front. Can't imagine how many people they have cycled through at this point. The carpentry shop is in South Florida. Apparently they stay in business because they do amazing work. Two-way mirror, also known as two-way glass. A two-way mirror is glass that is reflective on one side and clear on the other, giving the appearance of a mirror to those who see the reflection but allowing people on the clear side to see through, as if at a window. The name is misleading, but that's what it's called. This was 4 years ago now, so $10 per hour was way too low for the verbal abuse and labor. In my early 20s, I built guitars, ukuleles, and occasionally violins. I have since changed vocations, but still repair them from time to time. Story 15. It was my best interview. Great rapport with the interviewer, gave me the job on the spot. For a transfer to QA at Johnson Control. Came into work the next day to have the offer rescinded. The job was already given to the plant manager's niece, and it had only been posted because of company policy. The story is much longer and complicated afterward, but it was the first of several times I had been promoted, different companies, and then been told, never mind. Story 16. I had a Skype interview with a private practice, and the lady interviewing me literally made it sound like a stern military parent. You can never be late. Mind you, the job was an hour away. Even if you have a cold, you can never call in sick. IDK if this was meant for pre- or post-pandemic. We're a small company, so you won't have much of a work-life balance. But our pay for all this dedication is only $3 more than the measly pay you're getting now. Just a whole interview of red flags. And the last one was when the lady messaged me immediately after saying I got the job and had to leave my job at maximum 5 days notice, regardless of me kind of bombing the interview and claiming there were other interviewees in line. I could see why they were having trouble hiring people. Story 17. As the interviewer, candidate responded to a question I asked with, "Is that really how you want to spend our time together?" by asking me that question. When I wrote up my notes, I included that bit. It obviously came up in the debrief and a huge red flag. Other interviewers also had similar, though not as serious, feedback on the candidate. He was not hired. As the interviewer immediately launched into, with a rough accusatory tone, "You're a job hopper. Why are you a job hopper?" when I was being recruited for a role a few years ago. I'd been working successfully as an independent consultant for 7 or 8 years, which she equated with job hopping. I ended that interview pretty quickly with "I don't think this is going to be a good fit," and gave the recruiter some pointed feedback. He seemed to acknowledge that she was difficult. Story 18. Had a phone interview and the woman kept asking more and more intrusive questions. Kept hinting I'm a total piece of crap who's totally unfit for the job. It was the easiest job description ever. And jumping to conclusions about my life that were completely untrue. For example, I found out that being a freelancer who gets a lot of decently paid work each month is apparently living off my parents. She kept going on and on like that for quite a while before I told her to piss off and hung up. Didn't really need that job too badly, but it was in a different country, so the travel aspect was the main reason. Years later, I found out it was a stress interview, which apparently is a thing. Duck those people. Story 19. Had an interview at an office supply store once. Guy told me straight up it was a high-pressure sales quota job. Their prices on computers and dot peripherals were crap, and that's what I'd be selling. Dude straight up said, "It's a lot of work for low pay. Not a lot of people enjoy working there." And he finished off with the fact that he's been there for 18 years. Practically ran out of that interview screaming story 20. As the interviewee, I told them I hated salespeople when they asked why I'd left my last job, which exposed 2 things about me. I hadn't looked up the company I was interviewing with and that their primary line of business was sales. The mood got chilly real fast after that. Did not get the job. As the interviewer, had a guy ask if it was okay if he went to the restroom real fast and then never came back. His recruiter, who had come with him, was super embarrassed by the whole thing. Honestly, he was a young kid who'd just graduated, and while he was getting some of the more in-depth technical questions wrong, he definitely was asking the right questions in return. So we probably would have brought him on entry level. I think he was experiencing a case of imposter syndrome, since we were asking him things he didn't know, so he panicked. Hope he received some coaching on how to handle that. Story 21. The first question they asked was a statistics exam type question. Took me completely off guard. I half-assed the answer. A complete answer would have taken half an hour. The next question was about a Punnett square analysis. I answered honestly and said that the first thing I would do would be to look it up. Errors in Punnett squares are incredibly common, and I wouldn't trust anyone who said they could do it off the top of their head. I'd look it up even if I'd done one last week. They really didn't like that answer. They wanted to know where my husband worked and where we lived, and they concluded that our 6-month rental location was completely incompatible with the commute to their location. The whole thing was just super weird. It was like They sat down, determined to find a reason they should not hire me. I was relieved to get out of there. Story 22. Background. My face tends to get really red when I'm stressed, embarrassed. In a previous job, my company hired a consultant to help some of us improve our presentation skills. Consultant gave me some good advice. One of the weirder pieces of advice, however, was that if my face got red, I should flex my calf muscles because the flexing would divert blood away from my face and to my legs. I had no idea if that was true or not, but it was weird enough that I remembered it. Job interview. About 10 years later, I'm giving a presentation at a job interview. I'm a scientist, and giving a research presentation as part of a job interview is pretty common. My research was pretty good, but it had one critical flaw that I wanted to avoid discussing during my presentation. Somehow, everyone in the room locked in on the flaw and directed a barrage of critical questions at me. I could feel my face starting to get red, and all I could do was furiously flex my ducking calf muscles, which didn't do a damn thing. I didn't get the job. Story 23. An agency sent me for an interview and said the starting salary is £33,000. The interview went fairly well until the interviewer said, "So, what sort of salary are you looking for?" So using the info I had from the agency, I said, "Well, I think £33,000 is a fair starting point." The interviewer practically threw me out. He started to shout about wasting his time because I expected to be paid a huge salary. And who did I think I was? He was paying £20,000, story 24. When he said, "I'll give you extra hours if you bring me smokes every day," then put his hand on my leg and said his wife gives him passes to have fun. I also got a speeding ticket on the way to the interview. It was not my month. Story 25. Maybe not the worst, but one that stands out. I was the interviewer, hiring for a position working with individuals with mental or physical disabilities. The person I was interviewing used the word retarded multiple times. I pointed it out after the second use, stating, "This is a position working with people with disabilities. That is a word that is not tolerated in this environment." They shrugged it off. Maybe 2 minutes later, dropped it again. I stood up, thanked them for their interest, handed them back their resume, and told them I could already tell it wouldn't be a good fit and didn't want to waste their time, and walked them to the door. Story 26. During the summer after my freshman year of college, I applied for a part-time job at a mall outlet. Despite having zero retail experience, I got through the first round of interviews without any trouble whatsoever and performing well enough that the assistant manager wanted to give me the job on the spot. Since she didn't have the authority to do that, though, I had to meet with her supervisor a couple of days later. "It's really just a formality," she told me. "You know, to make sure you're not like a serial killer or something." I told her that I'd only ever murdered people in video games. It wasn't as awkward as I'm making it sound. Anyway, when the date of my second interview rolled around, I was in high spirits. The manager had me fill out a brief questionnaire, then started asking me some fairly dull questions. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until a particular inquiry caught me off guard. "What's the most that you've ever stolen?" the man asked. "Give me a dollar amount." I stammered. "Is that really a question you can ask? I'm just looking for a dollar amount." I racked my brain trying to think of anything that I might have actually stolen over the course of my life. I'd certainly gotten up to my fair share of mischief, but actual theft had never been part of my repertoire. "Zero," I finally said. "I don't think I've ever actually stolen anything." The manager's plastered-on smile suddenly dropped away. "I see, are you sure?" "Yep, really." The beginnings of a suspicious glower darkened his eyes. "Go ahead and answer again. Just give me a dollar amount." What had started as a dull interview had become a downright bizarre interrogation. I thought about getting up and leaving, but it occurred to me that the whole thing might have been a test to see if I would change my answer. "Zero," I said again. $0. The man sighed and put down his clipboard. "Come on, do you actually want this job?" he asked, mirroring my own thoughts. I nodded in reply. "Then you need to start being honest with me. Just give me a dollar amount." "Fine, it was $16. I finally lied, pouring sarcasm into my words. $16.42. The transformation was immediate. All of the disapproval evaporated from the manager's face, being replaced by a warm, visibly amused smile. "Hey now, that's not so bad," he cheerfully said. "So, what was it?" "A toaster." I hadn't even bothered to think about what $16.42 might actually purchase. I just said the first thing that had popped into my mind. It didn't seem to matter, though. My answer caused the manager's grin to grow even wider, and he spent the rest of the interview laughing and joking with me. The next day I got a call, and I was asked if I still wanted the job at the mall. I told him that I'd already taken a different position elsewhere. For the record, that was also a lie. Story 27. Job was for a vibration analysis engineer. I knew how to do the job well. I knew the pay should be around $95,000, and they stated $55,000 in the interview. When I tried to discuss my point, they said, "Don't worry, there's plenty of overtime." They also mentioned since they weren't involved with many balancings at the moment, I would assist the cleaning crew with a lot of the cleaning. I've never been so uninterested in a job in my life. Story 28. Bit of context. This happened in 2008 and I had just graduated as a massage therapist. Since the economy was in the pits due to the recession, glad this never happened again, haha. MTs were not exactly in high demand, so employers could be picky. The only reason I was even considered for most of my interviews was because I graduated from an accredited school. A lot of the places I interviewed at would turn me down pretty quickly since I didn't have either 10 years experience or the body of a supermodel with a massive rack. I'm 100% serious, BTW. Easily the worst experience was at a chiropractor who did absolutely nothing to hide his contempt for massage therapists. He showed up late, went into his office to check his mail first, and then proceeded to have the interview with me in his waiting room. He knew he could pick any MT he wanted and gave zero ducks about how I felt. When it finally got on the subject of pay, he offered me minimum wage. At the time, your average MT was paid about $30 an hour, and I was already working a dead-end job at a gas station making $2 more than what he was offering. I brought up how absurdly low his offer was, and he balked, saying that I would be paid as if I was working 40 hours a week, so it would even out. He also clarified that I would be expected to clean the office when not seeing a client, so I'd also be an underpaid janitor as well. Duck that guy. Story 29. I had an interview with EMC back in the day. I don't remember the specifics other than I was really nervous. I had a "we are sorry to inform you" email waiting for me before I finished the 10-minute trip home. Story 3. I had an interview where I did so poorly, the interviewer wrote it up and submitted it. It's too embarrassing to link to, plus I would prefer to remain anonymous. It was really just a miscommunication. The interviewer presented a hypothetical problem, and I gave him a perfectly reasonable solution to the problem. But he kept coming up with reasons why he wouldn't accept my solutions, and my answers got more and more ridiculous, until they didn't make any sense at all. I was just hoping he would drop it and move on to the next question, but he actually took my answers seriously and made me look like a complete fool. Anyway, I learned some things from that experience. Story 31. Not that bad, but I remember Taco Bell asked me what type animal I would be if I could be anything. Like, WTF, do you want me to say? I would be a fire ant so I could work efficiently with my closest friends. 16-year-old me said, an eagle, because they're strong and they can fly. Meh. Story 32. It was going to be my first real job using my college degree. I'd planned for it, bought new clothes, and developed answers to questions I thought they'd ask. The day of, I was sick. I called and asked if we could reschedule. They said the slots are full and that if I wanted the job, to come down and interview. Well, I went down because, needing a job. I was sweating through my shirt because of my fever. I nearly threw up just waiting to be called. Finally, I get called in. Get weird looks from other interviewees. I sit across the table from my interviewer, a very pretty lady. She smiles, but it's forced. I see her look me over with disgust. Proceed with the interview. I'm still a gross mess, and halfway through I feel the bile rise, the saliva filling my mouth. Think to myself, if I puke, I won't get the job. Force it down, swallow what came up. But I burped, couldn't be stopped. It smelled like vomit. She looked even more disgusted. Asks why I didn't reschedule the interview. Told her I was sorry, that I tried to reschedule. She thanked me for coming in and asked me to leave. Still got the job. Story 33. At an interview for a tech startup, they asked me, if you could be any animal, what would you be? I answered otter because, fun, active, work well with their hands, and cute as duck. They really debated whether or not to hire me because of that answer because, and I quote, we only hire predators, never prey. And they weren't sure how to quantify an otter because none of them had ever paid the least bit of attention to any sort of animal documentary or read biology or, visited a zoo recently. That job sucked hard. Story 34. Was invited for an IT helper position when I was 17. Would help fix computers for people at a shoddy PC fix shop. They asked me, what's the first thing you check if a customer calls and says their screen doesn't turn on? I said, well, you got to check if they have it plugged into a socket. They laughed and said, thank you, that will be it. Then led me to the door and gently pushed me out. Story 35. I went for an interview as a receptionist like 7 years ago for a vet. I really wanted to work for the hospital for years as it's highly regarded in the industry in town. I researched everything I could, tore their website apart, read about all the doctors, thought of tactful yet not know-it-all type questions. I did the works. I brought up one of the services they offer, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They treated me like I was a child. They embarrassed me in the attitude they had towards me. I came dressed in a pencil skirt, dress shirt, blazer, and low heels. I did my hair and makeup perfectly. They had no reason to treat me the way they did. I was eager, friendly, and on time. I still to this day have no idea why they hated me so much. I left dejected, humiliated, and insecure. Story 36. I had a manager call me for an interview just so he could tell me what a pause I was. Because I'd had 5 jobs over a 15-year period, 2 of those jobs were internships in college. A third was a temp position while I found a job in my field. I was unemployed because my last position, the company went bankrupt and closed. Apparently, he only hired people who worked somewhere for at least 10 years or had never worked before. I'm not some shrinking violet, so I let him have it for wasting my time and being a toxic waffle. And yes, I called him a waffle. When I got home, I called their HR department and told them essentially he must get his rocks off by belittling potential and current employees. When I walked through the employees, they all looked miserable. I'm pretty sure one of them shook their head and mouthed, "This place sucks." Story 37. I got an interview with Amazon to be a supervisor. They asked me to drive 1.5 hours to another city to do my second interview, despite the place I applied for being 10 minutes away from where I lived. The pay they were offering was good, so I thought it was worth it. I took a day off from my current job, drove there, discovering that they had given me choppy directions, causing me to get lost and have to ask for directions. The place I stopped at rolled their eyes. This wasn't the first time this had happened. They knew exactly where to point me. Red flag number 1. I finally arrive. Go to the interview. Over 100 people show up. Red flag number 2. They are doing a group interview for the role of supervisor and tell me they accidentally invited too many people and they only have 10 positions available for supervisor, and ask me if instead of, I'd like a starting position instead for barely above minimum wage. Red flag number 3. But then I realized this is way too organized. They expected this many people because they planned this and even had everything set up for a large group interview and even asked me personal questions about myself in front of multiple people. Red flag number 4. I do my best but feel insulted. I drove home and feeling cheated. I wasted 4 hours driving and interviewing, wasted all that gas and lost hours that I could have worked and went out of my way, wasting my precious time going to another town just for them to say, "Oopsie, they planned this." I realized working for them would be a huge mistake. They had no respect for me as a person, a potential employee, my time, money, gas. What made me think they would care about me once I'm hired? This was clearly a deceptive bait and switch, and I was not falling for it. Shady, shady, shady company. Shame on you, Amazon. I later sent them a letter declining them for the position. I would not be working for them. Story 38. Oh, I got this. My interviewer comes about 30 minutes late, and his first comment is, "You're the best-dressed candidate we've had all day." I'm in a polo and khakis. This man is a mid-50s-ish, well-groomed man in a button-down shirt and tie. When we get to the interview room, I expect this obviously senior and ranked guy to do the interview, but when we arrive, the manager, in quotes for later, turns out to be an early 20s white guy in a t-shirt with a dyed purple mohawk. I was beyond confused, but whatever. Don't judge a book by its cover. The manager then proceeds to stay sitting as I shake his hand. Never motion for me to sit, not ask for a resume at all, and just start with the questions. I'm not a very formal guy, but even I was confused by all this. All the questions are normal stuff like, where do I work now, my school, if I live in the area, that stuff. Then he gets into job-specific questions and starts with, what would you do if you knew an employee was stealing? Obviously, I tell him that I'd report that employee because you aren't allowed to steal. Well, what if it was the cheapest item in the store? A 99C water bottle and they only did it once. Again, I say stealing isn't allowed, and those costs can add up if they keep stealing. Well, let's say it's your store, Moni 100's supply store. What do you do? I tell him if it's my store and one of my employees felt the need to steal water, I'd probably just buy it for them and tell them not to steal in the future. Well, what if you forgot your wallet? You forgot your wallet and you know your employee is behind on rent and their last paycheck hasn't gone through yet and they haven't been paid? At this point, I'm just at a loss for words. What the duck is going on? Does he want me to say I'd just let someone steal or something? I genuinely feel like I'm being punked. He notices I'm kind of stuck and just moves on. All right, how about we test your sales pitches? Imagine someone comes in and wants 4 of the chairs you're sitting in at $20 each. How would sell them the chair I'm sitting in for $100 each? Again, I'm at a complete loss. What could I possibly say to that? If someone comes in wanting one kind of chair that's obviously a cheaper option, how the duck am I supposed to convince them to pay 400% that price for a different chair that's not obviously better in any way, especially on a product I know nothing about? I don't even remember what I said, but there's no way in hell it was coherent. After this, the guy ends the interview without ever having seen my resume, calls me by the wrong name, and sends me on my way. As for why the manager was in quotes earlier, a coworker of mine who knows a worker there told me about a week later that nobody who works in that store has a purple mohawk. All of the district's managers are black, and the older guy I described is the store owner who should have done the interview. I still don't know who did my interview, story 39. I drove an hour away to an interview at 8 o'clock a.m. I waited outside the interviewer's office until 8:30 a.m. with no one to tell me where to go or where she was. Finally, another employee walks by and I ask if they know where this woman is to interview me. They had no idea where she was, why she was late, and told me if she wasn't there yet, I should leave because she probably forgot. Okay? I decide 45 minutes is the cutoff, especially standing in a government building looking like a creep waiting. 8:45 on the dot. She rushes in, flustered, wet hair, and in casual yoga pants. With all the resurgence of patience I could muster, I greeted her and was met with a passive-aggressive scolding of how the interview was at 9, not 8. I triple-checked the email asking me to interview, and it was 8. We had conducted a phone interview, and she followed up with an email request to an in-person interview at 8. I was 100% positive on this. I hate being late. Even with this, and I did say, "I'm certain you said 8 a.m., ma'am," she wasn't having it. Conversely, she also went on about why she was late, surmounting in she went to the gym and forgot her underwear to change into, and had to stop at a store and buy new ones after working out before coming to work. She told me this in the first 5 minutes. Why? I didn't ask her. Regardless, she looks at my resume, apparently for the first time, because she proceeds to tell me how it is unimpressive and my graduate studies should have yielded numerous publications after 1.5 years. In my field, most don't publish until after 4 years. Even still, she kept saying how I had moved up the interview time, showed me the workspaces, and told me I probably wouldn't be interested in what they do there. I politely told her I had driven, at her request, to be there and interview for employment. I was very interested. She waved me off. As we left, I just tried to hold it together. I was very poor and very desperate for a job. Thanked her, and she told me how great it is to work for the government, how good the benefits, the pension, the time off are, on and on. She said, "If you can find an opening working for the government, you should try to check it out and get hired on. Haul up." I just looked her in the face and said, "Yes, ma'am, that was my hope with today's interview. Thank you," and left, and sat in my car and bawled the whole drive home like the desperate loser I was. That was a low one, to be sure. Story 40. At the time, I was living in this foreign country for about 2 years, and my language skills were only at a B1 level, so I could understand pretty well, but was terrible at speaking. The interview with 3 people didn't go very well. They spoke in their native language. I'd tried to respond in said language, couldn't, then switched to English every time. Luckily, everyone spoke English, but I was embarrassed the whole time because my language skills weren't where they should have been. Luckily, due to me being technically overqualified for the job, Bachelor in Science, and that the management is extremely nice and welcoming, I was offered the job that day. It turned out to be the worst interview of my life, but I'm still working there to this day, 2 years later, and improving my language skills. I'm still extremely happy, and I've never had more caring, down-to-earth management in a job. I got really lucky they gave this English speaker a chance. Story 41. Went to that small company specializing in furnitures. Got some task to complete in AutoCAD as a test. First thing I've noticed that the position I applied for wasn't the same as in description. Second thing is the boss shouting at everybody and swearing while I've been doing that test. And at the end, he invited me to his office and ducked off for 40 minutes where I had to wait, and it all ended up with weird conversation about his expectations and me explaining to him that it wasn't mentioned in the job description. What a cringe day that was. Story 42. I interviewed for a project management position. The interviewer describes the job. Basically, it was pure research and data entry of potential clients, then cold calling them and documenting the results. The job had mentioned exactly none of this, but was an average project management job ad, else I wouldn't have applied in the first place. I asked what exactly was the project management part and got told that could, not would. Be down the road, maybe 5 years in, but really only maybe. I thanked them for the interview opportunity, we wrapped things up, and I politely left. Story 43. I've never had a disastrous interview, but I have had awful jobs and bad bosses. It can't be said enough. Trust your gut. Anytime I didn't get a good feeling from the interview and walking through the job site office, it turned out to be a crappy place to work. Toxic owners and managers spread the ick around to everyone there. Story 44. It was my first real job interview. It was for a graphic design position in downtown Dallas for a men's grooming product company. I was so nervous, and when I took a drink from a bottle of water, I was shaking so much I spilled some on me. Also, I was very unprepared because my portfolio only contained things I made in high school for a graphic design internship I had, and some hand drawings that weren't great. I was about 19 years old at the time. Needless to say, I did not get the job. Story 45. I went and interviewed at a place doing the same job I do now. When the time came, the manager I was interviewing with asks me, "So, what would you like to be making here?" And I told him the amount, which was the same I was making at my previous job, and he said, "Oh, I don't make that much. Thanks for wasting my time." I got 2 things from this job interview. Never go on an interview that doesn't have a pay scale posted on the job listing. 2, I'm an industrial electrician. I'm not showing up in dress shoes and slacks to interview for a job. Almost ruined my shoes walking around this crap hole. Story 46. Sitting in the waiting room with two other interviewees, the manager conducting the interview recognizes one of them as her friend. While they were greeting each other, I looked at the other interviewee and mentioned her, "We have no chance." Story 47. In a group interview, the interviewer crossed a line through my name on the list he had after I told him what I graduated in. This was within the first 5 minutes of a 40-minute meeting. Story 48. I got invited to a group interview. I thought it meant that a group of people would interview me, which is fairly common. I showed up and there were about 10 other kids there. We all went into a conference room and they interviewed us all at once. They asked a question and everyone took turns answering. They switched up who went first each time, and one kid completely froze when it was his turn. So we all had to sit there in the most uncomfortable silence. Story 49. I was responding to a waitressing ad with open interviews in a new city. I dressed professionally, but when I showed up, there were a line of women there in club attire. I was quite confused. Anyway, I signed in, and when my name was called, I was brought through the kitchen into an office. So I didn't see the restaurant part. We get to talking, and 25 minutes in, I realized that this is a strip club. How did I realize? They gave me a tour. The minute I saw the poles, my heart dropped. I excused myself to the restroom and booked it. Nothing against strippers or sex workers, live your best life. But the pole is not for me. Story 50. She said employees got marked down 1 point if they came in late to work, even in a blizzard. She said it was their responsibility to check the weather the day before and prepare accordingly. Some of their employees commuted from 100 miles away, so they didn't cut anybody any slack. Usually I send a follow-up email saying, "Thanks for the interview, I'm interested in the job, blah, blah, blah." But I didn't send an email that time. Story 51. I was recommended by a particular manager to interview for a makeup counter position. It was a really tense, awkward interview with the store manager, and I wasn't really certain why he was so hostile toward me. Turns out, he was just trying to figure out if I was in on the other manager's scheme of stealing products and selling them on Craigslist, which I found out about after she was arrested the next week. It was a shock to me because she was a bit of a mentor to me, and I had no idea. Story 52. This was me actually giving the job interview, so I was the one hiring. We had to dramatically underpay the salespeople, so our choices were horrible. But none were worse than this one creepy guy. He was basically a serial killer. He walked in the conference room, and right away I knew he was sketch. I should have ended the interview right when I saw him. Ill-fitting suit, slick back hair, looked shady as duck. I didn't want to judge a book by the cover, though, so I gave him a chance. I asked the first couple questions, tell me about yourself, that kind of crap. Here's when I asked him to leave. I said, "So tell me why you want to work in sales." He goes, "Well, I'm new in town, so I think this will be a great way to get to meet people, especially women." And when he said especially women, he winked at me. Ew, just right now typing this gave me the creeps and made me shiver all over. Story 53. The interviewer insisted on knowing why I'd left graduate school. Now I had left graduate school because my advisor died in a car accident, and the whole small department was thrown for a loop, and no one seemed to know or care what was going to happen to me or my just started research project. The a-hole interviewer wouldn't even accept my advisor died suddenly and dug into the gory details until I was almost in tears, even intimating that I must have had feelings for my advisor. I couldn't wait to get out of there, and in my haste to leave, I knocked some solutions off a cart, which had no business being in his office, BTW, on my way out. I'd never been so humiliated in my life. After that, I was sure I'd never get a job in science. Story 54, I interviewed for an internship position with the Associated Press in college. At the time, I was studying magazine journalism, was a government reporter for the school-run newspaper, and had worked at my hometown newspaper as a page layout designer. The interviewer was obviously over-interviewing kids, and he was very snotty to me. He pointed out my experience and said, "So you're studying magazines, you write for a newspaper, you do layout. What exactly do you want to do? This is a lot of very different stuff." And I replied that I didn't think it was a bad thing to have a lot of experience in various aspects of journalism. He kind of snorted at that and continued being snotty to me. I figured out pretty quickly that I wasn't getting the internship. At the end, he pointed at a pile of stuff and told me to take my app-branded lanyard and tin of mints, and I said, "Wow, it's just like Christmas," in a deadpan voice as I left. Story 55. I drove an hour to be interviewed for a computer repair tech job at a rental company, and 4 of the way through the interview, they told me I was perfect for the position. However, they recently removed the position altogether. They then asked if I'd be willing to repair furniture instead until the position opened again. Story 56. I was right out of high school looking for a job to save money for college. I had an interview at a hotel and casino to be a hotel housekeeper. Not a glamorous job by any means, but I was 18 and needed a job, so I was actually excited to work here. I come in for the interview, dressed nice in a skirt and blazer and heels. I'm ushered into a banquet room full of people. Probably 20 people are in this room sitting in chairs facing a podium. My immediate reaction is, duck, this is an MLM. I hesitate at the door for a few seconds, and then think, duck it. May as well see what this actually is. And thus begins one of the worst and cringiest experiences of my life. After a few minutes, a woman comes to the podium and explains that this is a group interview. What the duck? They go around the room and ask us basic interview questions. It takes about an hour and a half because there are so many people. I come to find out that this is a group interview for every position at the casino and hotel. Restaurant cooks, hotel front desk, casino dealers, etc., every single position. After the question and answer portion of the group interview, the woman calls a bunch of names, and about half of the people go to another room. My name was not called, so I stayed seated. At this point, it's been almost 2 hours and I have to pee. Woman comes back and explains that the remaining people have passed on to the second portion of the interview. The second portion is with the departments we are interviewing for. I and a few other people go to housekeeping, meet with the manager, and are told we need to show them how we work. We literally have to clean hotel rooms for this interview. Keep in mind, we are dressed business casual. I'm wearing heels. I was not prepared to clean ducking hotel rooms for free during an interview. Stupidly, I stayed. I have to get on my hands and knees and clean bathroom floors, make beds, vacuum, etc. The room cleaning portion of the interview took maybe 20-30 minutes. We are also told we can't use the bathrooms in the room, so I still have to pee. Duck this. On the third portion of the interview, we are ushered into a different banquet room. At this point, there are maybe 12 of us. At the head of the banquet room is a table with 5 or 6 people. We are told they are the president of the casino and a few other execs. We are told to get in a circle and get this, dance. We are told to dance because, this is a fun working environment. Barf. At my turn, I hobble out into the middle of the circle and do a stupid little dance. Obviously pissed because my feet are killing me, and I'm about 3 seconds from pissing myself in front of these people. After the dancing, we are told to sell a pen to the president. I must have blacked out by the anger and embarrassment of this experience because, for the life of me, I can't remember what I actually said to try to sell the pen. After almost 4 hours of this interview, we are told we can leave. I sprint to the closest bathroom, pee for what feels like 20 minutes, and leave. By the time I get home, I have an email saying I didn't get the job. Story 57, pre-pandemic Skype interview for a programming job in the health field. It's scheduled for 7 p.m., which is already ridiculous, but they even managed to be 15 minutes late. The guy who interviewed me was a tech guy. Spent the first half of the interview telling me how hard and stressful their job is, and how they need someone who is basically available 24-hour a day in case of emergencies, and that people should be proud to work with them because their work is super essential, serious, important, etc. Spent most of the second half of the interview asking me increasingly personal questions like, do you smoke? Do you live alone? Are you single? Are you married? Do you have any health issues? What do your parents do for a living? Etc. When it gets to when and how did your father die, I say, I don't see how that's relevant. And he's like, oh, just curious. Finally, I tell him I'm not interested in the job because I don't think it's a good fit, and he immediately gets defensive, first asking me, how do you know if you haven't even tried? And then telling me, you will never get anywhere if you're scared of confrontation. I just tell him, well, thanks for the advice, and refuse the offer. Anyway, pandemic hits and they make a test screening app for the local government. Guess what company has been recently involved in a pretty huge security privacy scandal because anyone could see anyone's pandemic status just by entering their basic info? Edit. Since it's the first time one of my comments gets a few upvotes on Ask Reddit, I'm going to add a few more details that I remembered. I didn't apply for this job. The company contacted me on LinkedIn, and the first time they called me on the phone to schedule the interview, I spoke with a girl who whispered almost inaudibly for the entire call. It literally sounded like someone calling 911 from inside a closet. The guy who interviewed me only ever called me by my last name and didn't even try to make eye contact. He spent the entire interview looking at my resume with the snootiest look on his face. I'm a native Android developer with some iOS experience, and they made it sound like that was what they were looking for. But it turns out they build all their apps using a proprietary cross-platform framework. Yikes. During the interview, I tell him I'm a pretty creative person who really enjoys working on the UI, UX side of things, and his reply boiled down to, we don't do that crap here. When he asks to see a project I worked on, I direct him to the Play Store and show him the last published app I developed at my previous job, for a huge retail client, by the way. And at first he tries to insinuate I didn't actually work on it, then claims it's nothing special because it's nothing like what they do, no crap, Sherlock. Despite his ridiculously confrontational and demeaning tone and my clear refusal, he actually asks me, so you were not interested? Like another 3 or 4 times before ending the interview. A couple weeks after the interview, the same company contacts me on LinkedIn again with the same exact message as the first time. Like they forgot I had already interviewed and refused their offer. I have a much more experienced and qualified friend who also interviewed there before I did. He met the same guy and had the exact same interview experience. I initially assumed the interviewer was acting like that because I'm a junior developer, but it turns out he's simply a socially inept hole whose job should probably be anything other than doing interviews, interacting with other human beings. I also have another friend who actually works there. He was basically their first hire, and they treat him a bit more respectfully than most other employees, often going to him to ask for advice that they don't listen to. Most common question they ask him apparently is, why can't we get anyone to work for us? After the pandemic app scandal a couple months ago, he said the company basically plunged into chaos and hasn't yet recovered. Probably never will. Honestly, I'm just glad it wasn't my first interview experience, because I probably would have been traumatized for the rest of my life. I feel bad for anyone who has been in that position or couldn't afford to refuse the job. Edit 2. I went back to read on the pandemic app scandal, and it's actually a lot worse than I remembered, since they didn't just accidentally give everyone access to their users' pandemic status, but to their entire medical records stored on their servers. Considering that this company developed a lot of the IT infrastructure for public health in my area, I'm sure there's no need to explain how huge of a ducking mess they got themselves into. Story 58. Interviewed for a job at GameStop like 7 or 8 years ago, the manager was doing the interview, and she spent the entire time just crap-talking the other people that came in for interviews and her own employees. I realized right then it was going to be a super toxic environment, but I needed the money, so I just smiled and nodded. Only ended up working there for a couple months in the end because I found a different job elsewhere. But I was indeed correct about my hunch. Everyone was so two-faced at that GameStop. They'd act like your friend when you were working the same shift as them, but then turn around and blast you every chance they got when you weren't around. Story 59. I was in the room with the VP and an HR person. The person who would be my boss if I got the position was running a few minutes late. We were making small talk, and one of them brings up a recent football game. I told them honestly that I didn't keep up with football. I'm saying this as the other guy comes in. I turn around and he's basically just missing the face paint, head to toe in Brown's apparel, which seems strange for a place of business. Lost him before he even sat down. He basically ducked with his phone the whole time and embarrassed the other two people in the room. Story 60, September 11, 2001 at 10:09 a.m. I had been watching the news early morning and debated whether or not to even go, but it was for a position at a temp agency in Ohio, so I wasn't thinking there would be much of an issue. As I was waiting in the building's waiting area, a custodian rolled a TV out to the area and flipped it on. This was a few minutes before 10 a. I know that because I watched the South Tower collapse just a few minutes before the recruiter came out and said my name. Her face was red and puffy from crying. Tear tracks, both dried and fresh, lined her cheeks. I immediately offered to leave and reschedule at a better time. She dismissed that and said it was okay. She needed the distraction. There was a terminal on the credenza behind her. That's a computer station for you youngin'. There were lots of cities listed in the first column, then names in the second, then 2 columns with either red or green lights. The first column header read connection. The second header read status. We were going through the standard interview stuff, but she would occasionally say, "Excuse me 1 second," roll over to the terminal, and stare at the bottom of the screen for a minute. Sometimes sniffle or wipe her eyes, then come back. After the third time, I asked her if everything was okay. She started to apologize, but then said, "No, honestly, it is not." She was good friends with her counterpart in the NYC office for this same staffing firm. When people from my city would move to NYC, or vice versa, they would talk. Over the years, they built a relationship. She said that first column of lights was indicating if the corresponding terminal was connected to their nationwide network. It was green for NYC, which was fine. She said what worried her was the second light was also green. That only stayed green for 10 minutes after the last key press. No mouse on these terminals, and her friend's coworker's office was in the North Tower. She had been at the terminal within the last 10 minutes. By this time, it was about 20 minutes after 10, and the interviewer said, "I don't know why she hasn't evacuated. I hope this is a mistake in the system." The terminal had a billboard-based messaging system, so the interviewer thought she was maybe accessing that, but no messages had been left. Other people had a few threads going just asking how she was, but no responses. At 10:28 a.m., we heard a loud collective gasp come from outside the office. This was followed by sounds of crying and other emotion. The front desk admin assistant knocked on the door jamb and said to us, "The North Tower, it just fell." The interviewer had apparently already spun to the terminal when I was looking at who had knocked and then received the terrible news. When we looked over at her, she was collapsing. I mean, she literally fell onto the credenza sideways and just slid to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at the terminal screen and the NYC line was kind of blinking every few seconds. Both lights were red. The front desk girl was sitting on the floor with the interviewer, kind of holding her. honestly, I just took my things and left. I had met her 30 minutes before. We had experienced the real-time effects of this terrorist tragedy together, but I could not help her. I stopped at a sports bar on the way home and watched the TV coverage until late afternoon. I never called her, and she never called me. I think about her every year on Sept 11th. I used to remember her name, but I don't anymore. I hope she's okay. Story 61. I was fresh out of university and had spent months applying for hundreds of jobs, getting no response more often than not. So when I finally received an invite to an interview, I was elated. It was further away than I liked, but it was in my field and would be decent experience. As I had to take public transport, I left with time to spare. Everything went brilliantly until I arrived at the company I was interviewing with. 1. I arrived 15 minutes early, approached the front desk, and politely introduced myself and informed the receptionist I have an appointment with Miss A. The receptionist raises her brows at me and tells me this person has no appointments today, as she never works in the office on Tuesdays. Cue panic 2. I pull out my phone, which thankfully has the email confirmation, and I show this to her. She nods, tells me the same thing again. I ask her if she can please call the interviewer. She rolls her eyes but does as I ask. After 3 rings, the interviewer picks up, I suppose. The receptionist nods, hangs up, and tells me to wait over there, waving me off in the direction of the entrance. A little confused, I head back to where I came from, as there is no waiting area. Seats or benches, I stand there quietly. Half an hour pass, and still no one has come to collect me. In that same time, however, a number of other young people like myself, looking out of place, have arrived. 45 minutes late, a girl who cannot have been much older than myself comes down, calls out 5 names, and gestures for those people to follow here. She got my first name wrong, but it was close enough that I did not question it and followed. 5. The 5 of us follow her sheepishly into a room which has 5 tables and chairs ready and waiting. Each of us is directed to one of the tables and informed we will be completing a number of assessments. We are also directed to present the diplomas, credentials, and passports we were asked to bring. 6. A multiple-choice test is laid out in front of us, and Miss A leaves us alone. The test, in reality, is one of those thinly veiled personality tests which take no more than 10 minutes to complete. Fine, a bit of warning. Next time maybe, but fine.